I'm going to describe the route of a walk that circles around the village of Fonthill Gifford. It's quite a rewarding walk, maybe about 4 miles in length, and it's a pleasant mix of field paths and quiet lanes, none of which are very demanding. Maybe in one or two places there are a few gentle slopes, but no more than that. Now, Fonthill Gifford is located here in the county of Wiltshire, although the suggested starting point is up here in Berwick St Leonard. Berwick St Leonard is just a little collection of houses, a farm and a small business park. There are 2 entrances from the road and several parking possibilities within this area. And incidentally, this here is the footpath by which you would return at the end of the route that I'm going to describe. Now, a video like this is not very practical when you're actually doing the walking. So if you do want to do the walk, then it might be a good idea to go to this web page where you can download a paper copy, or maybe download it onto your smartphone and use that as your aid while you're walking. So here is the route now marked out. Let's just walk through it. It starts off with this open field path. That turns into a little lane with a couple of small houses. The lane develops into Stop Street, which has a few more houses and some village amenities on it. And that leads into open fields, across which you get to the other side, and Fonthill Lake, which offers a very pleasant walk with lots of views of wildlife. And it turns into a little road, not very busy, but a little road that leads up to, and you can just see in this picture, a rather grand arch at the end. And then finally you pick up the footpath that takes you back to Berwick St Leonard. The whole route might be a bit clearer if we superimpose it on an aerial view of Fonthill Gifford and its surrounds, and if you do that, this is what you see. I think nothing very difficult. I did say it's a walk of 2 halves, so they are joined together by a little bit of field walking on the left-hand side, and then a little pleasant pathway on the right-hand side towards the lake. Now, we can highlight 1 or 2 interesting features that you could expect to meet on this route. First of all, and unusually for just a short walk, there are no less than 3 notable churches if you're interested in visiting churches. The first one's in Berwick St Leonard's. It's a 12th century church, built again in the 19th, or renewed in the 19th. Now it's technically known as a redundant church. Not a very attractive name. I think the Church of England have now changed that term to closed church. But that doesn't mean to say that it's going to be locked. In fact, I think it's usually open and, might be worth a view if you care to take the time. So that's the Church of St Leonard's. And then secondly, down here in Fonthill Gifford, there is the rather more substantial Holy Trinity Church. It's not as old as it looks, probably dates from around about the 1860s, although there was an earlier church here, one that's somewhat associated with a man called Alderman Beckford, who I'll come back to in a minute, but though he demolished that one and had this one built instead. And finally, up here, there is the small Church of All Saints in Fonthill Bishop, and that's an attractive mix of 14th, 15th and 19th century build. Now, these are buildings you could see in today's Fonthill landscape, and perhaps they do all deserve a look inside if you have time, but it's worth knowing about a couple of landscape features that you no longer can see, historical features. It's worth knowing about them, I think, because together they account for why Fonthill is still much visited and why it still thrives in the modern imagination. First of all, it's important to know that the land is closely associated with two families. First, there is the Beckfords. And this is William Beckford. He lived between 1709 and 1770. He was often known as Alderman Beckford because at one point he was Lord Mayor of London. But something else that was said of him was that he was the richest commoner in England. Sadly, however, his was a shameful wealth. It came from inheriting the proceeds from enslaved plantations in Jamaica. Beckford's plantations at one point were worked on by as many as 3,000 slaves. But in 1745, Alderman Beckford came back from Jamaica and he purchased 5,000 acres of the Fonthill estate, upon which basically he intended to showcase his wealth. For example, it led to the building of this triumphant arch, often attributed to the architect Inigo Jones, although that has been questioned. And beyond it, in this area here, Beckford purchased an existing large country house, which he set about renewing. Unfortunately, the house got burned down during those renovations, but Beckford just shrugged this off, and it just led to him aiming higher. So he commissioned a house that in the end became known as Fonthill Splendens. Richly furnished and loaded with works of art, apparently intended as a must-visit destination for anyone important who's passing through Wiltshire. But you can't see it. It is no more. And that is because of Alderman Beckford's son. Now, Alderman Beckford had 8 illegitimate children by 3 different women, but just 1 legitimate offspring from his marriage. And that, there's a picture of the Fonthill Splendens before we move on. But from his marriage came William Beckford Jr., 1760 to 1844, and it was he who inherited the Alderman Beckford's vast wealth, much of which William Jr. then sunk into this area of Wiltshire. And in particular, what you're looking at now was the building of a vast Gothic castle that he called Fonthill Abbey, just south west, in fact, of where you will have been walking. Sadly, it was a bit too much of an engineering experiment, and substantial parts of the building simply kept collapsing. And so it's only visible today as a few remnants of ruin, and those, I'm afraid, are not easily accessed. But then the original was not very accessible either. Beckford surrounded his Gothic castle with a 12-foot wall, 7 miles circumference, although at least he did leave, I think, 1 million freshly planted trees. So there is something of a positive legacy there. As often happens around exotic or romantic stories of this kind, there is a small community of enthusiasts who continue to discuss and marvel at Fonthill Abbey folly. For example, building 2-scale models of the original fantasy, as this chap here has done. Now, let's acknowledge the second family of landowners associated with this area. For just along the map where this arrow is pointing is Fonthill House, the hub of the Fonthill estate today. Going a bit further back in time, it was owned by one John Bradshaw, a gift of Oliver Cromwell, a gift because Bradshaw had overseen the trial that led to the execution of Charles I. And when the monarchy returned in the shape of Charles II, the property was given back to its former owner, Lord Cottington, and such was the change of post-Cromwellian mood that Bradshaw's sad body was exhumed and subsequently beheaded. Sometime later, the estate passed into the possession of James Morrison, a London businessman. It stayed in the Morrison family through Charles Morrison, and then rather more recently through the Conservative MP John Morrison. And it was John Morrison who was awarded the last hereditary peerage granted to a commoner before that practice was finally abolished. This means that the current owner in the Morrison family has inherited the title of 3rd Baron Margdale. And that family line continues with daughter Nancy Morrison. She runs one of the small businesses now associated with the estate. NM Designs specializes in funky socks, such as those that you can see here. Interestingly, one feature of the Beckford legacy in this area has recently been revived. William Beckford enjoyed very much being the centre of social attention, and so would hold lavish parties on his Fonthill estate. For example, the one celebrating his 21st birthday lasted for several days, spread across grounds said to have been illuminated by 30,000 lamps. There were 300 main guests of Beckford, but he also made the party available to an estimated 10,000 local people, with extravagant entertainment laid on for them. Well, the current estate echoed some of this with a 21st birthday party for Nancy Morrison. Unfortunately, as this press coverage indicates, the event went down considerably less well among local people than Beckford's did, and indeed some locals were reported as saying they felt like modern-day serfs. Well, one last feature is worth emphasizing. At this point here, between the two halves of the route, there is an excellent pub called the Beckford Arms, which might be attractive as an opportunity for mid-walk refreshment, perhaps. It's quite posh. Don't expect a game of darts, but there is a pleasant garden and the selection of food and drink is very good. Finally, remember there is a step-by-step account of this route if you do want to do the walk, and if you do, I hope you'll find it enjoyable. I certainly did. And then if you have an appetite for more, there are other walks described here.